Good evening. Thanks for joining me. Welcome to episode 2 of Stand the Gap podcast. Stand the Gap is a organization where we are focusing on the 18 to 40-year-old vote, the young people in our country. Stand the Gap is a call to young Americans and to take responsibility, to step up for Christian principles and to lead through example, not only in our daily lives but also in our communities, and to empower people to step up and also be bold leaders in government. So, thanks for joining us. What we are going to be covering today is a little bit about what we covered. I was on WYAB this morning with Mr. Andrew Gosser, close friend of mine, old friend of mine. We go back to some campaign work together, and we covered a lot of things today. We covered a little bit about the campaign that I ran, some of the campaigns I've worked on. We talked a little bit about the state of our country and about the state of the state, kind of what's going on in our community, what's going on around the world. And we also talked a little bit of some Rankin County local stuff. So we'll be doing the same thing. I just kind of want to go over a lot of the stuff we talked to, but I'm going to go more in depth as to some of the things that we didn't get to cover because there's a lot of information, right? And there's only an hour spot, so we had to get through with what we could. So thanks again for being here. What we're going to start with, what I'd like to start with is just explaining again that what we're doing here is getting conversation started, right? We're trying to encourage young people, encourage people my age. Again, 18 to 40. That seems like a pretty broad gap, but that's really wide range. Excuse me. That's really where we're so in the internet, right? We're online. We're on YouTube. We're on podcasts. We're on social media. Everything we get is kind of through those sources. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a reliable place where people can come, be encouraged, be informed from what's going on, from people that hopefully are familiar faces, because this is a local thing. We're probably going to reach some people outside of there. I know we already have. We're getting some great feedback, so thank y'all. This is very much startup, very much a small team, but we are working out the kinks, and God is opening doors, and we are working with several different people that are starting to come to the table, fortunately, to make this as good as it can be. A lot of these people have a lot of the same goals as we do. We are, speaking out for Jesus. We are talking about, first and foremost, that we are Christ followers. Jesus Christ has saved our lives, and we all have a story. So we want to share those stories with people. We want to talk about the things we know, and we're going to talk about the things we don't know. We're going to get advice and input and opinion from the areas that we're lacking, because let's face it, we don't know everything. We're not claiming to know everything, but again, if we can show anyone just a small bit of inspiration or encouragement, that's a win. And at the very least, guys, if we take something from this and we're able to walk through it, this is also for our kids, right? So let's get going. I want to start with plain and simply something, me and my wife had been talking about. And it really is, it's just God's order, right? So, man and wife, women's roles, and kind of what we've been told. I think for a long time, women have, kind of been taught and raised that it's okay to, you don't need to depend on a man, right? Um, and it's created a stigma, I think, where ends up happening is women and men and wives, husband and wife, excuse me, end up having two separate lives. They're kind of like they have their own goals and they have their own ambitions, not saying that there's anything wrong with, goals and dreams, but there is an order that God created, and it starts with guys, men, you got to be connected to God. Um, we're gonna offend some people here by what we're saying, and that's okay because it is about accountability, not only to myself but to each other. So we feel like we've had that order, right? Um, I felt like I've had that order, but in reality, I was the man, that was submitted to God like I should have been. And so, even though we thought we had God first, I wasn't leading out like it was, and my wife was following. Nothing ever really, seemed to fit in place. Women can only do so much, and they can't, keep bugging men, to follow God. That's got to be something that we do, that we decide we're going to surrender, we're going to follow him. And that's hard for men to talk about. Let's face it, it was hard for me to talk about because that's essentially our pride. That's essentially saying, I don't have it all figured out. I can't do it myself. And I'm going to surrender it to God. And that's hard for guys because we're very prideful naturally, human beings, but that's the way that God wanted it. That's the way that he wanted it for men. And so how can you do that in the workplace if it isn't happening at home? You can't. And it can go, men can go their whole life. And what ends up happening is failed marriages, broken families, from being too prideful when, in reality, it was just submitting to God that could have prevented everything, right? So that's the hard part. It is a long and narrow road. That walk with Christ and leading our families. But it is, man, it is rewarding whenever we see those fruits from our families and from our children start to produce the way that we know God intended them to be, and that order is there. Our wives are very much helpers. That's what God intended them to be. That's what God, said, I'm gonna make this helper for you because let's face it, man, we can't do everything, right? So, not only through your wives, but also through your children and through my kids, I've learned something beautiful about God. The kids see this world, right? They see it so openly, and it's just so wonderful to them that they feel like they're connected to everything. You kind of have to tell them sometimes, like, hey, the world's kind of dangerous out there. You shouldn't do that. But their eyes point out, right? They're naturally looking for what's next. They're curious. They think everything's great. And, also what I've seen, is about looking at my kids is that there is just a rise of evil in the world. And I'm concerned about that. And it makes me remember now more than ever that we have to be courageous for our kids. We have to step up because there is an attack on kids. There is an attack on women going on right now in our education system. And, I do think that a lot of schools are failing. A lot of colleges and universities are failing. Don't get me wrong, there's some good schools out there, but I can't imagine, guess I can't imagine how much we have to hate our kids to send them away for 4 years or to one of these universities of these liberal universities where they teach these crazy things. I mean, can you imagine sending your kid to Harvard? Just kidding. Um, we have to show our kids to be better than that. We have to not just think that we're going to send them to school and they're going to learn everything they have to and we're done. We just got to teach them a few things. That's not it. Um, we have to show them how to grow as people. We have to show them how to grow spiritually and not just take that easy road of repetitive behaviors and not growing, but to take the hard road, how to learn how to love, how to learn how to be a good neighbor, how to be forgiving, how to be patient. The fruits of the Spirit, right? That's naturally Christianity. How we can, how do we tell them these truths, right? So, protecting them, arming them, because there is evil out there, and we have to arm them with God, and protect our families. Because let's face it, human evil exists; it's not going anywhere. The enemy is out there. The enemy is fighting every day. They say that the enemy is like a hungry lion, just ready to devour you all the time at any moment's notice. And he is, y'all. So, unfortunately, we've come to a time in society where we've actually, we have laws of nature, right? The things that are natural to us, and we've actually taken the lawmaker out of the laws. So that's just all we have now is just straight, um, what's right or wrong, and there's almost no principle or reason behind that. It's just like don't do this, and that's it because it's wrong. We're not connecting it back to where it came from. And we also see that separation from theology and science, which, I think there should be a little bit of separation. But, I heard when Copernicus saw that the sun was the center of our universe and not God's design, we kind of just lost it. That's kind of when we started just really focus on science and not so much the biblical originality from where it all came from. And it's funny because whenever, someone's a murderer or bad in science, we call them sick. In theology, we call them evil, but it's one and the same thing, right? Uh, we both of those entities should be um, fighting in an attempt to cure human evil, and we have to keep Jesus at the center because to do both and work together to help cure that evil in the world, uh, if we're not doing that, that's what's going to take over our youth. We have to be paying attention to mental health. We have to be paying attention to what our kids are going through. And I think by bringing, our nation closer to God, we have a really good chance at healing that. So there is a rise of evil in this world, and we have to pay attention to that. Just like in the 20s, when there was this group of misfits, troublemakers over in Europe, and a lot of people thought that they're not going to be coming of anything. Don't worry about it. Um, the National Socialist movement, turned out to be the Nazis, and in the same way, we have to be very careful about how we move and how we guard our families in this country and what's going on. Who is out there trying to influence our kids? What groups are out there trying to get them to become part of their group? We see a lot of this Antifa movement. We see a lot of these groups that are, saying they're for a cause, but it's really division. And the United States has to be a guide. We should not be that bad example. We are supposed to be the guide for the world of what freedom looks like. It's not a perfect freedom, but it is a freedom under God. Because let's face it, you don't see anybody trying to leave America. Everyone's trying to get in. This is the greatest experiment in freedom and in history, and we have to be vigilant. So now's the time that we, like I said, have to be courageous. We have to step up, and we naturally have to have and feel those followings of Jesus that are in our hearts. I was watching some pastors' panels um, the other day, and they were talking about I think before we get into what we're seeing in our country, we have to understand what we're seeing in the world. Um, for example, Israel. It has been a um, big topic. You've heard about the Israeli hostages being freed, the peace treaty that President Trump got negotiated. But y'all, those Israeli hostages being freed is really just something that only God have done. We have to make sure that we give God the credit there. But nevertheless, Hamas is still doing their thing. There's still conflict going on over there. It's been going on for 2,000 years. Been going on as long as I can remember. But Islam is still going. It's not going anywhere. It's not peaceful, and it's hard to imagine peace through Islam. Andrew said today, France is gone. A lot Spain's gone. A lot of places where we would think that Christians are welcomed and even Americans are welcome. He said you would see signs like death to American foreigners, get out, free Palestine. You know this stuff's really going on. It's going on over there, and if we're not careful, Could you imagine walking down the road and there's signs that say "Death to America, Death to Christians," um, and your kids reading that? Like, Dad, aren't we Christians? Don't we believe in God? You guys, we have to be careful. There's no really telling what will change over there, but we should celebrate what was done. There has been progress made with the deal, but let's face it, Islam is predominantly the religion in the Middle East. It is a huge religion across the world, but let's also be clear. Islam has a religious component. I wouldn't say that it's necessarily a religion, uh, but it does have a religious expression. Um, I think it is made for government, and it is a push on peaceful people. It is only good and tolerant for the people who convert. Everybody else, well, convert or die. Um, these folks don't have authority in their own homes that are even believing in Islam. They're told what to do, and we're blessed because of where we are, and we have to protect that. So the more it grows, the more authoritative it gets, the more it becomes intolerant to other people and other religions. And I think the bigger discussion with Israel is how much pressure we see in that area to keep things under control, right? With the wars and just how involved the United States is. People say like we have all these troubles here, like why are we involved in Israel? Well, they're kind of connected. It's really complicated, but I'm going to try to compress this in a way that maybe we can understand. What Trump did was remarkable. Don't get me wrong. Um, we have to look at this. When in his first term, moved the embassy. And it didn't cause World War III. The world didn't collapse. We didn't see the Middle East just completely fall apart. We did see some peace. And this brings, a hopeful discussion, I think. And, so what does this have to do with us? What do we do here? Um, I think Republican or Democrat, Catholic, agnostic, you know, the violence in the Middle East and the murder in the Middle East, is not discriminate. Um, excuse me, it is discriminate, but it is against everybody that's not for their religion. Um, the only thing in the Middle East that Israel maybe pushes, excuse me, that Islam really pushes, is this is the one and only religion. You have to follow everything about it. Now I know people that practice um Islam peacefully, but what it says is that, you either have to be a part of it or you're against it, and you're against us, is what they say. So we have to remember, that in Deuteronomy 17 it says, God says, um, counsel to Egypt. This is a counsel to Egypt, and what he's saying that, you see these things in these nations that are strong, but don't be afraid of them. You saw the wonders I did in my mighty hand and my arm stretched across and brought you out. So remember what I did to Pharaoh, and we have to remember that when we are faithful, when we are obedient to God, that you know, even if it's these religions or these countries or these territories or these groups of people that are trying to persecute and stomp out Christianity, we have to remember that God keeps His promises, and if anything, Israel is a little tiny Israel has survived. Let's face it. Some people say Israel needs to give up some land. Like they don't own that much land. They don't have that much land. We have to remember that God keeps His promises, and no matter our heritage, it's our allegiance to Jesus that keeps the faith there. And we, of people as faith, have to keep that as our primary criteria, I think, of our life, that we are Christ followers, and every other characteristic, political or whatever comes after that. That all comes secondary. But when we compromise, I think that brings judgment. Just like the Jewish people lost their right to that land because they compromised their relationship with Jesus. I think we'll also forfeit the blessings of God if we're not careful in how we're treating Jesus and how obedient we are to Him. God expects us to live with integrity, repent, change our behaviors, and act accordingly. So I think, Israel is a little living expression of the faithfulness of God, and we have to hope for a revelation. And I think we have seen that. We are seeing that. I think Charlie Kirk was trying to explain that. We'll touch on that in just a second, a little bit, because it does get kind of interesting there. But we have to boldly use our voices for Judeo-Christian worldview, right? We have to stop being silent when we hear lies. We've been silent for too long. We've been under the guise of tolerance, diversity, and inclusivity. Like that's the cool thing to be now, right? We don't necessarily have to oppose those concepts, but when they require us to deny the truth of Scripture, I think that's when we have to say, "Whoa!" That's where we have to stop, step back, and we have to acknowledge that those are lies. Marriage, was between a man and a woman. That's God's idea. That's not government's idea. Biological sex isn't confusing. It is boy and girl, very simple. So we can't celebrate and go along with um, these powers that are mutilating our children and trying to confuse them um, into thinking that these things are normal when it is, plain and simply written there for us. So, again, we have to boldly use our voice where God has planted us. Each of us use a Christian worldview and the blessings of God. That's true tolerance, I think, when we can, talk about things and not have to compromise on principle. We have to remember that each of us, you've heard this, are the salt and light of the world. The things that we come in contact with will have uh, direct, you know, reaction to what uh, we do and what we say and how we act. So when we are living out that Christian life, it's going to be directly reflective in the people we come in contact with. So, we must be the people of God. This His power is on display all the time, and that's super exciting because we see it right now. God's still watching over His promises, and even in all the bad, He's doing it over there in Israel. He's doing it in our country, and He can do it here in our homes and in our lives too. So, I think it's important to know a little bit about what's going on over there, because anytime we start to talk about Israel, right, we start talking about the conversation of territory and the conversation of end times, prophecy, and we have to ask, so what does that mean, for Christians here in the United States? Well, we have to pay attention, like I said, not just because of the prophecy and the possibility that, we're getting to those times, but because of uh, if we're not careful and we're not paying attention and we're not being counterproductive on these things, or productive in the way that we counter these things, it takes over our government and then it starts to swallow our religions, just like it did in the Middle East. Um, just like we have to be concerned here with our government and the risk of losing Christianity in the West. So we have to be involved, and we have to be involved in protecting the system that allows us to preach the gospel. You heard Charlie say that a lot. What's the most important thing? Bringing people to follow Christ. What's the second most important thing is making sure you can do the first thing. We have to have the courage to speak up, uh, especially when we see those threats to our country and to our state. We cannot tolerate what they do in other countries in the Middle East, because just because we believe so much in prophecy, right? Therefore, equally concerning, we should be very, 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 very interested in what our government is doing here and how that's affecting our religion. Um, I think that, we think of Jesus's return sometimes as a get out of jail free card, and um, it's just going to be like, everything's all right now. Jesus is back, and we don't have to be engaged, but that's not the case. Just like Noah's Ark, we're in a point of time where we have to decide what side of the door we're on, because that door is closing. And I think we have to surrender to God, but also we have to walk it out, right? Matthew 24 says the beginning of these birth pains is now. Um, what do you see in labor? You see these birth pains, and it starts to get worse, and things will continue to get hard and intense until the point of delivery, and that delivery is when our King comes back to earth. So whether it's 10 years, whether it's 100 years, doesn't really matter. We are in our last days in this earth. You're not going to see, 100 years from now, no matter how good you eat. So why don't we live it out like it is our last days? And why aren't we doing the best we can for our kids? So to continue that, I want to backtrack just a little bit um, into the Charlie Kirk situation, and I'm just going to talk about it for a minute because there's a lot of things swirling around out there right now. Um, including a lot of conspiracy theories and a lot of things to do with Israel. And while I think that we should pay attention to some of it, I think the bigger picture is that right now we have the attention of a lot of people. And for me, especially in politics, we're always, the more attention you can get people to your cause and you speak the truth and it's for the right reasons, like you can sway those people. Same thing. We should be petitioning for Jesus right now. We should all be speaking up. We should all be saying something. We should all be talking to our friends, our family, our communities about this. And we should be. You've heard the phrase, and I heard this phrase, like if we can bring one to Christ, that one will bring thousands. And I think that goes for all of us. I used to think maybe that doesn't go for everybody. I used to think it applied to me, but I've made it a point now where that's just like I said, that's not really a choice I have anymore. Um, it's everyone's chance to get it together right now. So how do we know a revival when we see it, when we see what's going on and the reaction we've had to Charlie Kirk's death in this country? Because let's face it, he was speaking the gospel, right? We're seeing breakthroughs, we're seeing interventions. It's not just about big gatherings of people. So what are we looking for? Well, Charlie was calling out. Uh, the powers of principalities. He called for all normal people to take charge. He called out for young people, older people, everybody, to take charge for God. So in that pastors panel I was watching, one of them said it's time for all of us to disciple, not just the church. It's calling for our young men, our women, and we have to help prepare them. Like I said earlier, we have to read them the right books. We have to make sure that they're writing it on their hearts and that they're ready to go forth for the next generation and they're ready to carry this battle on. Because right now, it's us. Before us, it was somebody else. And after us, who's it's going to be? Who is it going to be? Well, it's going to be who we train, who we help equip, um, and who we teach that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And y'all, we are due for a revival. God is using this moment for His divine purpose. There are good people in government, so we have to keep that in mind with everything going on because I know sometimes it's a little hard to believe because there's so many things you've heard deep state conspiracies we've heard. I wouldn't even say they're conspiracies. But just so many different things that we have to remember. We have to pray for these people because we do have guys and girls right down the road who are our local aldermen, who are our mayors, our councilwomen, our senators. We have to pray for these people. God anoints and God appoints, and we get the leadership that we deserve. People get the leadership that they deserve depending on how that country is living. I truly believe that. So, there is a part of me that has hope in our country because, um, you know, it was not going very good there for a minute. And I think, you know, while we shouldn't just look at one person as they are the one who has saved everything, we do have to acknowledge that they were put there by God. Um, I'll use my race for example. Running my campaign, we came up short, right? And y'all, I'm okay with that. I was totally convinced that this is a God thing. That's just not what God had in the books for me. There's another outcome that He wanted. Totally makes sense now because had I got that position, I probably wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing right now. Um, maybe, but maybe not. So he allowed me a platform in a way where I know the things I know what he's done for my life, and now I can go out and talk about it openly, freely, not have to worry about it. Might it cost me something? Maybe. Who cares? Because Jesus is my Savior, my God, and we're going to tell as many people about that as possible because He's done amazing things in my life. He can do amazing things in your life, and that is worth telling. So, um, y'all, we've been more divided than ever right now, especially in our country. I think that's changing. But as another one of these pastors said, we've been told a lot of things about God that have nothing to do with God. And we have to understand that we are one race, we are one people. Now, we are of different ethnicities, but still one blood. There's actually a black pastor who is talking about this, and I think it's interesting when you hear a black pastor, especially who says something like that. He was the one that was saying these things about one race, and but a lot of the black community hates Trump. And it's confusing because here's a, very Christian conservative pastor who was saying these things. And what he said was, we all need a savior. Black, white, brown, yellow, green, blue. It doesn't matter. Sin does not discriminate. Sin can estrange you from God no matter who you are. And it's a choice. It's a choice to love or hate. It's not something that, yeah, sometimes it is taught, but it's not grown in our hearts. We were naturally born to love, but we are sinful and we are prideful and we are selfish creatures, and unfortunately, we are equal at the foot of the cross, and it is godly to unite together. And but there are people who profit from division, from our division. Um, and my wife Jennifer said it, so well that two things can be true at once. That's God's story, and there is an end. Is that there's going to be good and there's going to be bad. There's going to be good trying to fool people, and there's going to be bad that does fool people into thinking it's good. So it's kind of confusing there. But that's when you have to just settle back and think, like, God's already got this worked out. Our mission here and now is God seeing who His people are and who is going to tell everyone about Him, plain and simple. That division that I was talking about has infiltrated our schools. You even lack sophistication. If you don't feed into this academia of false knowledge that, the arts and some of these things, and there's nothing wrong with art, but that some of these things that just don't matter are the most important things, right? Um, the story of the United States and history and the founding fathers wasn't really hit a whole lot in schools to my remembrance. Instead, we talked about the Indians and the indigenous and the lands and really, I started to think about it. I was like, we were separated and divided fairly early at a young age, and we weren't told about those truths and where we came from the way we should have been. And we should have spent more time uh, on the facts rather than all of the mush that, you know, starts to categorize people into certain brands of who they are. You know, that maybe if you're white, you're a conqueror and this, and maybe if you're black, then you're a victim and you're owed this, and if you're Indian or Hispanic, you're just kind of in the middle. And it's not like that. You know, the other side is held onto the things that divide us the most. And we need men and women who understand the times, that more division is coming constantly. Every 2 to 4 years, it comes with elections. You will see that they will try to divide us, and they're even trying to use Charlie's death to try to divide us. That's the tool of Marxism. It's finding someone to be the poster child of exactly what they are, and that's liberal ideology. I'll just say it. They're trying to say, let's forget about our true history, how we were really founded. We don't want, we don't want you to keep up with Jesus and the way it should be, but we want you to conform into this world and what we're building. We want you to develop into a worker. We want you to develop into what we say. And unfortunately, that's what happens. We send our kids off to school for 12 years, and then we get them back, and then all of a sudden they're lost, they're confused, they don't know which bathroom to go to, and they want to turn into, cats, use litter boxes, and it just gets crazy, y'all. Uh, they want us to forget the good and evil, what it all stands for. But we have to know those things. And unfortunately, it leaves many of our youth feeling very lost and alone. I said it a minute ago, John 14, I'm the way, the truth, and the light. And it's so refreshing just to know that, even through all of this that's going on, we have to have peace. And peace isn't, not the absence of conflict and hard times, but peace is the presence of God in the midst of all that conflict and the evil that's going on. So we cannot cower. And for our churches, our churches can't cower either. Not for buildings, budgets, or baptism rates, as I've heard before. We have a generation looking at us for answers, and we have to give it to them. God made us as stewards for one purpose, to protect liberty and freedom, and I think to bring as many people to Jesus Christ as possible. Because this is spiritual warfare. There is a battle going on around us every day, all day. And it's essential to know this, that spiritual forces impact our lives daily. And if we don't see that, it's because we are being buffered by the world. We are being fed so much that we are so numb to the fact that, we have to step outside of the church and be the church all the time through Christ. So part of staying the gap is what we're doing. We're talking about those things. We're going to talk about religion. We're going to talk about state. We're going to talk about government. We're going to talk about politics all together because we need a spiritual and a biblical worldview. Thank God I was able to go to a school that taught me those things. But y'all, our culture begins with the reflections of the most moral fabric of people, right? Say that again. Culture begins with the reflections of the moral fabric of the people. Everything else comes after. I said that a minute ago. It doesn't begin with political labels, but we end up seeing that we are actually a lot more conservative once we dig down into it. And a biblical worldview is essential if our liberties and our freedoms, excuse me, are going to be sustained because we have to value that structure that we embrace that help make our world a better place. Otherwise, we're just kind of we're going down the wrong road. So, if you have a passive attitude towards God, I suggest you change that because you will miss the kingdom of God. I have missed out on the kingdom of God for far too long because I just thought that um, when God came back, it was going to be better and it was going to be okay and he was going to forgive me and that was it. And I just continued to live my life the way I wanted to. And fortunately, I was able to wake up and, we all have to personally choose to believe and accept Jesus in our hearts. The same with spiritual engagement. You have to use your words, your mind, and the tools God's given you every day to fight that because if not, it will continue to come at you all the time. So continue to wake people up. Um, we were talking the other night how God hardens hearts and he softens hearts. We've heard that before. We know that before. I think right now what we're seeing is a lot of hardened hearts. I think been a reason that up until now that our hearts have been hardened in certain places, for whatever reason, whether it's what's going on and what happened with Charlie, and then the awakening that we're seeing in people, and some people may be a little apprehensive to that. That's okay. You know, there's bad stuff in this world, but God lets it happen because just like the Jews in Egypt, but when he let them go when they realized that they needed God. And I think he'll do the same for us. He will do the same thing for you in whatever you're dealing with or whatever you're fighting with. So we need to speak of it. And unless people see, this video or go to a school that is teaching these things, when are they going to hear it? Because I don't hear or know of many public schools, especially that are talking about this stuff. But if you preach the gospel without talking about the circumstances of the time and what's going on, I don't think you're really preaching the gospel personally. Because let's face it, legislation is morality. It is what's right and what's wrong. So how can we not mix the two? Freedom of religion, which after the separation clause, turned into freedom from religion, and here we are, not wanting to talk about it too. What ends up happening is progressivism leads the way to take over, the same way Islam is taking over in the Middle East. And again, if we're not paying attention, it breaks down the morality of the nation, and then it comes in to take over your religion. The point of Sharia law is conform or die. Like I said, that's Islam. And that is what we as Christians are fighting against. That is literally one of the biggest battles we are fighting. Evil people are trying to take control of our children, and parents are unaware. They're surprised when they come back with these insane thoughts and ideas. And you've probably heard me say this. I think I posted it the other day. Don't be surprised when you send your children to Caesar and they come back as Romans. You will not recognize them. They won't recognize themselves. Uh, and unfortunately, not all pastors are doing their job, I don't think. Not all of them, but, most of them. We're seeing weak pulpits. We're seeing weak Christians. Um, I don't understand also how any politician can be the person that says what a marriage is. That's God's design. The Bible says what a marriage should be, not a politician. So our pastors, I think, have to step up, um, and the ones that think there is a separation of church and state, uh, guys, the state has infiltrated the church. Wake up. So I ask, what are we going to do, pastors? I was hearing a story about listening to the story, excuse me, about a pastor in California during COVID. They were talking about closing their church, and they gave them the go. They said, "Hey, you got to shut it down." So the pastor was talking to his attorney, who was like, "Hey, what do we do? And what can we lose? What will happen?" And his attorney gave him 15 points of like, "Hey, this is what you could lose. These are the things that'll go away. Like, you will be done if you do not lock the doors." Um, and the pastor called his wife and he had a conversation with her. He's like, "Look, I think I'm not going to follow the order. Like, I'm going to make sure that the doors stay open." And guys, guess what? Your wife would much rather be a widow than married to a coward. That's right. Your wife would much rather be a widow than married to a coward. One man and God constitutes a majority. So whatever God wants to do, however He wants to take our lives, we have to conform to that. We have to make sure that we're doing that for Jesus, and we have to be careful of the ones trying to rewrite history. Um, Something else, that leaves people feeling like victims for nothing is we get people get categorized and compartmentalized into who they are told there should be when, like I said a minute ago, we were one blood. we're one people. So I say be careful to those that are trying to rewrite history and trying to, put you in groups, per se. Because imagine saying that to the indigenous people of America, America, like your faith is irrelevant, and this is what it is now, and that's what's happening slowly. We are slowly being told, like, this is what it is now. This is what it is now. Forget about that. Forget about Jesus. Forget about the Bible. We've withdrawn this from the public arena because they've told us to keep our faith out of it, right? They've told us to keep religion out of politics. They've told us to keep the politics out of church, and we're being told to withdraw our truths, quite frankly. Um, so again, what are we looking for that is a revival in our country and our people? Well, y'all, especially our pastors, I think we have to step back into that square. And I get it. A lot of people are hesitant. It's a little bit funny, but Jesus said we have to step into the ecclesia. Look that up. What that means is we have to step not only back into the church, but we have to more importantly step into the public square of having these discussions and talking about the hard things and holding each other accountable. Um, People stepped out of the church a long time ago and then did nothing else. The Bible, book by book, is simple. I say the plain is the main thing, and the main thing is the plain thing. You can take California, for instance, another example. Back in the 70s and 80s, from my understanding, it used to be pretty good, but they saw a decline because they decided to remove their politics from the revival. And what you ended up seeing was a movement in their state that declined. Now you see bad schools, schools teaching kids these crazy things. They are one of the worst states in the country, and most, people think that they should just go away, just because of how bad it was. Now, there's good churches in California, don't get me wrong, but when we avoid the politics, y'all, it takes over our children because um, that's what school is. That's what the government is. That's there. If we're not talking about it over here and we're not prepared for it and equipping ourselves for it, what's going on over there? We're not going to be prepared to step into those. And we'll talk about it later. School boards and those meetings, and be able to know what to do, how to run for office, how to change things, how to engage the system. Jesus said, "I will build my ecclesia." Um, and that was over, this is what was over the entrance of these places, of these in ancient Greece, because it was where people came, where problems could be solved. It said liberty and equality, right, over the entrance to these places. And like I said, we stepped out of the public square, out of the church, and we forgot the gospel. If the gospel is the most important thing, and the second most important thing is protecting the government that allows us to the ability to preach the gospel, don't you think that's worth getting involved with? That's what you heard Charlie saying, that, the most important thing is that we are trying to lead people to find and follow Jesus, as my pastor so beautifully says. And the second most important thing is that we have to make sure that we're doing the first thing. Well, we can't, that second thing is making sure we're protecting the ability to do the first. Because you can't do the first if you're not protecting the second. And if you're not protecting the second, that first is going to go away. Hope that wasn't confusing, but think about it for a second. You have to protect your rights, you have to protect your freedoms, your liberties, and the ability to plain and simply be able to talk to Jesus. Um, and me, that's what makes me so upset about this is why don't we just listen? I know I did it for a long time, but we have to start to wake people up, and we have to start doing this for Jesus because it really matters. And you know what? It's gonna affect the course of the world. It's gonna affect how the world changes and what happens. So we'll get a little bit more into what that means as far as civil government. Um, there's a bunch of Christian principles of civil government. I think there's two major sources of Christian principles of government. The first is the Bible, the sacred text of Christianity, right? The second is the writings of Christians who addressed civil government. The Bible declares that God rules not only in heaven but earth, and that He is constantly concerned with the affairs of men. That's best illustration of this was he sent Jesus down to become a man and lived as a man in this world to deal with the concerns and the political order of what was going on, right? So, in Exodus 20, we see that God sets forth his requirements for man in terms of biblical laws and moral principles. And one day, God's gonna be back. He's gonna be back to judge us by these standards. And he's gonna ask, like, did you follow the laws? Were you going according to what I had laid out for you, or were you not? So while evidence of all these facts are pretty clear, the example of Jesus Christ, who names himself King of Kings and Lord of Lords, I think that demonstrates the extent of God's claim over over every civil order of his actions, which is funny because we just had a No King's Day. You saw those happening all around the country, and I wonder if anybody thought to think, about the greatest king of the world. I wonder if anybody stopped to think, oh, No King's Day. Well, what about the true king? You see what they did there? Some of you, if you're listening, were out there declaring No King's Day, right? Now, what did it make you think? Well, it's because somebody who thinks they're a king is ruler and dictates and this and that, yada yada. No, it was tricking you and changing your mind for that little key word. God, Jesus Christ Himself, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Um, and we're all, created in that image and likeness, and we all have value, and we all have dignity, and all of our rights that we're expressing during these things come from those concepts. Man's life and liberty are precious in the eyes of God. He loves that we are able to do these things for Him, and so therefore we have a duty to work together and help protect life, liberty, and property. Man's problems at root are spiritual, and no political policy can reform that. Right? Nothing can. No law that we make can correct man's sinful behavior. The Bible declares that God alone can change man's evil heart, producing goodness where otherwise evil reigns. Therefore, any utopian concept that we can try to come up with or concerned with achieving a perfect society by political, manipulation is just flawed. They say that, oh, we can make it better in this way, and it can be, so much better if we do it this way. That's not going to fix man's sinful heart, y'all. Only Jesus can do that. Only by coming to the Father can He do that. Hence, man in the political sphere, we can't presume or assume that we have the knowledge or ability to construct a just political order or a good society without God. It's not going to happen, ever. The Bible claims that God has instituted just laws and principles by which men should live in personal dealings, in the family, in the church, in the state, and in all other spheres of life. And the Bible explains that God has written these basic principles of law on the hearts of all men and given to men at the capacity of consciousness, to distinguish good and evil. This knowledge, however, does not ensure compliance. Just because it's there doesn't mean we're going to do it right. We're prideful. We're selfish. We're going to end up doing what we want to do anyways. And y'all, it's one of those things where there's no perfect government, but like I said earlier, we are, as the United States, the perfect um, example and the best example of freedom and an experiment. And if we're not paying attention to the laws of Christ and the things that He laid out specifically for us, we will miss it. We will miss it fast, and we will miss it, and it's going to be too late. So what can we do? We're going to talk about that in a second. We're going to talk about some things that me and Andrew didn't really get to go in depth of today. Now that we kind of understand, okay, like how that's what we're supposed to do. That's how we're supposed to be involved. Like that's our duty. That's our responsibility. That's why government and politics and religion should mix. So how do we get involved in that? We're going to go over that in just a second.